Shalom and welcome to our daily shiur in Parshat Shavua. We're continuing Shavua Tov to the Parsha called Teitzei. Teitzei. The ending of our last Parsha saw some national matters of war, going out to war, whether it's a Milchemet Reshut, non-mandatory war, meaning conquering other lands other than the land of Israel, or we learned about Milchemet Mitzvah, the war of a commandment to either protect the Jewish people or to conquer the land that God promised the nation of Israel. We learned about Bal Tashchit, destroying fruit trees for no reason when we're sieging another country. That was the end of the last Parsha. Now we come to this portion of the week, and some of you may know there are Ayin Daled Mitzvot in this Parsha. Okay? Malta, every morning I give you the right to clean the board. There are Ayin Daled Mitzvot in this Parsha. 84 mitzvot. There's no Parsha like it. 84 mitzvot in this portion of the week, according to Sefer HaChinuch, if I'm not mistaken. There's nothing like this in the entire Torah. And therefore, it's a Parsha saturated with a lot of mitzvot. A lot of the mitzvot have to do with the social world of Israel, and including the private person. Since it's such a big burden to learn, and we only have 4 hours of study, what I want to do is utilize the time to concentrate on some of the mitzvot, and perhaps either skip or speak only briefly about the others. The beginning of the mitzvah, I want to be able to sew a thread through several of the opening mitzvot that have a joint idea with whom we're dealing with. The parsha opens up, Ki Teitzei le'milchama lo'evecha. It too is talking about a war of reshut, where, as you know, the situation is not an easy situation. Soldiers being away from home, being away from their wives. Often, the lower side of a human being can be revealed. We've seen this through history, by armies, by soldiers. And the Yetzer Hara can work overtime on an individual. And especially for relations with a woman, often that Yetzer Hara can be released and be very strong. Remember, a war is not a picnic, and it's a very difficult time. And here the Torah is talking about the ability to take a woman who is not Jewish, and she's called in the language of the Torah an Eshet Yefat Torah, a woman. She could even be married. Yefat Torah, she's a beautiful looking woman, and she goes through certain stages after taken into captivity, whether she's cutting her nails or letting her nails go longer, making her hair or not making her hair, sitting in captivity. Is it to really give the one that took her into captivity time to think, does he really want to be with her or not? Is it for the purpose of giur, conversion, and then marrying her? That's really more or less what the matter is here. Keeping her to captivity for a month's time, and then if really after such a month your mind is cooled off, your Yetzer Hara is probably cooled off, do you really want to take her and have relations with her, make her your wife? This is the opportunity. And apparently we're talking about that part of a member of Israel that he's very material, very physical, and these points are obviously very strong on him. Remember, we were given the intellect to control the body. We were given the intellect, but it's very personal. There are those that their intellect is weak and their emotions are strong. And this perhaps is a case where the body is very strong and the Yetzer Hara is very strong. And therefore we see a case of this where the national side is less ideological and the personal side of the soldier, if there's a case like this, is very strong. And here the Torah says there's a solution to meet up with the strong Yetzer Hara of a soldier, what he's allowed to do, what he's not allowed to do. And that's more or less what I wanted only to speak about in a short measure, and now get to the next subject. That's what I wanted to speak about. I'm reading now, skipping to Pasuk Tet Vav, verse 15. And again, we're going to talk about also a material matter or a physical matter that we'll be able to sew through section to another section. Kitiena le'ishtei nashim. If a man has two wives, yes, according to Torah law, a man is allowed to have two wives. Only after 1200 years after the destruction of the temple, one of the great Rishonim called Rabbi. Who? Which great scholar disallowed it, which was accepted almost by all communities that we can't have two wives. I can tell you from 36 or 37 years of marriage, one wife is enough. One wife is enough. It's hard enough to create shalom bayit. It's hard enough to recognize the sensitivities, the attention needed for a wife. She's not your locker room gymnasium partner that you play basketball with and you can, do this and do that. A wife's tears are very close. And sometimes you didn't even mean anything, but that's how she understood it. And then comes down from her eyes, tears. And you're going to have to pacify her and realize and give her. And you wanted to go out with the guys that night to see a movie? No. And you wanted to go play basketball? No, you're going to have to be with her, especially the first year. Kitiena le'ishtei nashim. And now the Torah says, follow the text. Ha'achat ahuva, one is loved. V'achat snua. You might translate the one is hated, but we can learn and prove from other cases that snua does not mean hated here, just means less loved. Do you follow? The Torah uses the terminology to mean less loved. There are other cases, you've seen it? Where? Very good. Excellent. 2 points for Ranan that we remember regarding the two wives of Yaakov Avinu, Leah and Rachel, that he loved much more who? Rachel. And she says, Snua Anochi, quote unquote. Doesn't mean I'm hated. It means I am. Would Yaakov hate Leah? No. But rather it means that he loves her less. Okay? So here, this is the code language of the Torah as explained by the oral Torah. What happens? V'yaldula vanim. Okay, he has kids. Ha'uva v'asnua from both wives. Okay? V'haya, and it'll be. V'haya. Haya means was. V'haya, the verb of the Tanakh. Do you see this, Moshe? This is the turning around. Vav. We call it vav hahipoch. It turns the past into the future into the past. This vav, in the biblical terms, not in modern day terms, turns the tense into its opposite. Ve'haya. Haya means it was. Ve'haya, and it will be, okay? Ve'haya, and it'll be. Habena b'chor lasniya. In the case of, yes, sir?
What is and it is?
The verb lihiyot, to be, not to be. There is no is.
Oh, yes,
only
no
God.
There's no copula in Hebrew, I forgot.
Ve'haya bena b'chor lasniya, the ending of verse 15. In the case of this situation, that the bechor, bet chafresh, the firstborn, is to the less liked woman, and the father passes away. We're going to learn here about the laws of inheritance, the laws of Yerusha. The Torah gives special rights to the firstborn. Firstborn is holy. Whatever is first in the eyes of God, in the eyes of Judaism and Torah, is unique, has special rights. Because the nation of Israel is nicknamed in Shemot chapter 6, that's correct, Beni Bechori Yisrael. Repeat those 3 words, just checking if you're paying attention. Can you close your eyes and do it as well?
Beni Bechori Israel.
Beni, my son, Bechori, my firstborn Israel. God says to Moshe Rabbeinu regarding the nation of Israel, what is first is unique, is holy. Remember your first baseball glove? Tov, you know what I mean. Just play with me. Come on.
Sure, I remember.
There you go. You remember how special it was?
Sure.
Do you remember your first car?
Yes.
I'm not going to ask you to remember your first wife, because we want you only to have one wife in the future. What is first, especially in spirituality, ideals, values, is special.
We have 2 first.
What do you mean?
Like we have one first for one wife, one first for another.
Okay. But we're
My
talking
first
about...
wife and the first wife I loved.
No, so we're talking here, the firstborn is always unique. The firstborn from the strength, the inner strength, the ability of fertility of the husband, has kedusha, special kedusha, and that is represented or manifested as well monetarily. Vaya, Pasuk 16, put your finger on the place and follow the Hebrew reading. Vaya, and it'll be, on the day that he's going to be bequeathing to his children, from the word nachala, inheritance, eight asher yelo, whatever he has. Here now we see a negative prohibition in the middle of 16. Lo yuchal, he's not allowed, he cannot. Livaker does not mean here to visit. Livaker is to give rights of a bechor. Lo yuchal livaker ben ahova. He won't be able to give the elite, prestigious rights to the son of his loved, more loved wife. Al pinei, more than venasnua bechor. He won't be able to do that because the Torah demands giving a double nachala, a double Yerusha inheritance, only to the firstborn, even if in this case it means the first which comes from the wife that you love less. Ki, here's the reasoning that God is stating in this speech of Moshe Rabbeinu. Et ha-bechor ben asnua, the bechor, the firstborn, from his less loved wife, yakir. Yakir means he must recognize, he must give recognition that my firstborn comes from this woman that I love less. And what does it mean monetarily? Latet lo pi shenayim. I'm stopping here. You see my peh? Pi shenayim is an idiom. Pi shenayim, we're dictating a double portion. So a multiple. Pi, I don't understand why, but pi is like a multiple times two. Pi shenayim, double, must give b'chol asher yimatzeh, whatever he has right now in his estate, b'chol asher yimatzeh lo, okay? Only what exists now, not something that's in the futures market, in the stock market, and it will mature in a year after the death of the father. No, that we don't give him double. Only what now is liquidated, which is present now during this time, as the Talmud explains. Rashi brings it here in verse number 17. Kihu reishito, no, that's the reason he's the first of his strength, his fertility powers, and therefore lo lamidvav, he has mishpat habechora. My dear friends, it could be that a father has personal preference to give a greater portion to a son of a certain wife, but the Torah says no. We are dictated by God to give a double portion, dafka, to your first son, from whoever was born, from whatever wife it is. Let's just say, for argument's sake, Malta, listening, we have 1,000 shekels in the kupa, in the fund, to bequeath. 1,000 shekels. And there are two children here. The Bechor and the firstborn of the second wife. But he was born second. How much will the Bechor get, the real firstborn, how much will he get of the 1,000 shekels?
666
Very good.
67
Very
euro.
good. Excellent. He'll get 2/3 of the Yerusha, the inheritance. Whereas the plain son will get 1/3. Since 2/3 is double of 1/3, that will be the fair allocation of funds amongst the two children. The Bechor gets a double portion. Okay, the son gets a double portion. That's what I wanted to share with you. Let's go on now to the next mitzvah. If there are no questions, we understand that? Okay. We're up to Pasuk Yud Chet. In your Chumash that's printed like the Jerusalem Bible, we have a gap, space, in between this and the other. In your printed Chumash, you have which letter? A Samech. Okay, Samech means Satum, it's closed. There's only a gap of about 9 letters or so. We don't hit the enter button and skip a line. It's not too much of a gap. And now we go on to another particular mitzvah. You see how often the Torah is expressed in writing. There's a gap in which will be scribed in the Chumash this way. It's not in your printed Chumash. You just have a samech. In the Sefer Torah itself, there's no samech that appears. The gap appears. Show him your Tanakh how it's written, please. This is how the scribe will write a Sefer Torah, with those gaps, which certainly indicate a new subject, but don't take off too much time. There's some sort of correlation. Let's read. Pasuk Yudchet, we come now to the rebellious son section. Ki yeh ish, if there will be to a man, ben, what kind of son? Sorer umoreh. The word lasur, the verb lasur is to remove oneself, and moreh is what? What word will be moreh? From the word, it doesn't mean teach. The Rashbam explains he's mikanter. He's always unhappy, disappointed, bad-mouthing. That is the word moreh. Maybe it comes from the word mored, rebellious son. So what is this rebellious son doing? Einenu shomeh b'kol avivu v'kol imo. He doesn't listen to his parents. Boom. Violation of which Torah mitzvah? Kabed et avicha ve'et imecha. He doesn't pay attention to his parents. He doesn't honor Abba and Ima. Right? Kabed et avicha, honor your father, ve'et imecha, and your mother. Now, what has to be done? V'yisru oto. Have to afflict him. Apparently, in a very strong way, he does not listen to his parents. And the Talmud tells us, and Rashi brings it, look, he's stealing, he's menacing society, he's drinking a lot, and he's eating a lot of meat. He's not a contribution to society. Now, what might happen with this young man if he continues going on this derech in a few more years? By the way,
You might marry a goy.
he might marry a goy. What else? By the way, is he of age? Because he's about to be punished. He's afflicted. V'yisru oto, meaning, as Rashi says, we warn him in front of 3 witnesses, and he's going to be given lashes. We try hoping these lashes. Now, is he 13 years old or not? He has to be 13 years old. Because if he's not 13 years old, Rashi and the Ramban explain, then he would not be a candidate for punishment. Only if you're 13 years old are you obligated in mitzvot, and can you get punishment. So it says here, they'll afflict him, but he still doesn't listen. So we have someone who's a menace to society. He's at the age of 13. Has he committed, though, how shall we call it, a capital crime, a federal crime? No. He's stolen. Is that a federal crime? No. What do you get for stealing? You have to pay back 20. What other mitzvah is he ignoring or not doing? What about Kedoshim Tihiyu? To be holy. Chapter 19 of the book of Leviticus, Vayikra. How do our sages, especially Ramban, Nachmanides, explain how does a Jew become holy? He does everything in a measure. Moderation. Can you eat meat? Of course. Can you drink wine? Of course. But don't exaggerate. This young man is exaggerating. He's drinking quantities of wine, getting drunk. He's eating like a glutton quantities of meat. He's stealing from other people. And now the Torah says in verse 19, V'tafsu vo aviv imo, let his parents may catch him. V'otzioto el ziknei iro. They're going to take him out to the elders of the city. Remember what the elders mean in the Chumash? The court. The Sanhedrin. V'el sha'ar mikomo. Malta? Sha'ar. What did we learn at the beginning of last Parsha regarding a gate? Do you remember we learned the opening pasuk? Shoftim ve'shotrim, judges and police officers, you shall appoint where?
In the gate.
B'chol she'arech, at all your gates. What does a gate symbolize in a Torah meaning? It's the entrance to a city, the entrance to a town. The town may have a wall, and by the wall there's an entrance, there is a mashkof, 2 mezuzot, like you go through Jaffa Gate, right? And there's a mezuzah you must put on the gate, right? Yes? And when you walk into a city, like we explained in last week's Parsha, instead of seeing a casino table and betting places, you see that there's order in law, there's justice, there's ideals, values of God. That has significance to the content of the town that you're entering. So here, this kid, you bring him to the elders of the city, to the courthouse. Sha'ar mikomo, the gate of his place. What's at the gate? Beit mishpat, a beit din. V'amru al zikneiro, and they will say, verse 20, and they will say to the elders of a city, they'll make a proclamation, the father and the mother, V'neinu zeh, our son, we love him. He's still our son. A son that sins is still a son. Soreru more, he's a rebellious son. He's a menace to society. Einenu shomeh b'kolei, doesn't listen to our voice of Torah. Zolel, he's drinking so much, v'sovein, eating so much meat. What does the court do in verse 21? Urgamu kol anshe iro v'avanim b'meit. He's stoned to death. Skila. Skila is one of 4 death penalties issued by the court. And, I'm sorry. Okay? And what happens to him? He's stoned, dies. Uvi artahara mikirbechem. By doing so, you're devouring the evil amidst you. And who sees this? This is publicized on live television and radio. V'chol Yisrael, Facebook, I don't know. Yishmu, they will see this. V'yuro, and have fear. My dear friends, this is a very unusual parsha where he did not yet commit a crime that's punishable by death. So why is he put to death? Rather, our sages teach us in Masechet Sanhedrin in the oral Torah, we want him to die now, not guilty, rather not later, where he will what?
Will he do something worse?
Do terrible things to society.
Put him out of his misery?
This is a novelty that we never saw in the entire Torah. Yamut zakai v'al yamut chayav. Let him die zakai, that he's not yet obligated, and not chayav. It's a very big novelty that seems to be very extreme, and so on and so forth. And
also, we can see the klal is more important than the individual.
Oh, right. The individual rights here are suspended vis-a-vis the harmony, the peace, the well-being of society of the Jewish people. Now, he's violating 2 prohibitions. Number 1, he's stealing. And number 2, he's not acting with holiness. Yet the Torah says we want to kill him now before we can kill him later. My dear friends, before he becomes a greater menace to society. In last week's Parsha, we learned 2 or 3 other cases that we can draw a parallel where someone is going to be killed even though he didn't really commit a federal, is that the word? The federal offense or capital offense? Thank you, sir. I want to explain, but first bring Rabbi Akiva. And then I'll be happy to hear questions. Rabbi Akiva in the Talmud says, this section called Ben Sorer Omareh. Please repeat it.
Ben Sorer Omareh.
Never, ever happened. Will never happened. And why was it written? It was written so that you interpret it and you learn Torah and you get reward for it. In other words, it never really happened. But it's as a deterrent, written as to instill fear in Jewish society. It never did happen. But the Torah gives the right to the parents to bring him to court and he could be killed. But never ever did it happen. That's one opinion. That's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva in the Talmud. No, not because it just never happened. He holds Rabbi Akiva. It could, I want you to know another thing. For our high court to kill, when you learn the Gemarot in Masechet Sanhedrin and Machon, you learn that if the court of Israel, for capital punishment, ever put someone to death once in 70 years, that's one version of the Gemara, once in 70 years, you know what they call that court? A hanging court. It's like an extreme court. What is it coming to show? With all the laws that we have from the oral Torah, in order for capital punishment to be issued, it's very, very hard. So take that into account. Now, what do I want to say as former examples? Does anyone remember the rebellious elder of the Sanhedrin in last week's Parsha, We spoke about it briefly. But if he does not accept the majority vote of the Sanhedrin and he rebels, he's put to death. You know, he has yet to make an instruction against the great high court of 71 elders. But he's going up against. That's called, in the language of the Gemara, Zaken Mamre, a rebellious elder that's going up against the high court. And he's put to death, even though he's yet to perform an action that's worthy of death. The Talmud says, going up against the Sanhedrin, that's terrible. He deserves death. That's number one. Number two, do you remember or not the capital punishment issued to Eidim Zomimim? Do you remember these types of false witnesses? You two come to court and say, we saw Yoel stealing at the grocery store in Shoshana. And then two others say, we were Dr. Gershon in a fish restaurant in Tiberias at the same time.
Fish and chips.
Fish and chips, I'm sorry, there you go. Fish and chips. Okay, I want to repeat. These two say, we saw Yoel stealing bamba at the local, no, that's the name. Let's give him something that's penalty of death. We saw him...
Card.
What?
The card. He stole the card.
It's not a penalty of death, is it, Ezra? Give me something that's a penalty of death.
Another person.
What? We saw him bowing down to idolatry. These two. And then Ezra and Ranan comes and says, how can you guys be giving testimony? You saw him on Shoshana Street. That's the parallel one. On Shoshana Street bowing down to Avodah Zarah. You two guys were with us at a fish restaurant in Tiberias the same day, the same hour. What do? You two that tried to cause him to be put to death. Now instead, we listen to the second pair that said that you were having fish restaurant with someone else, and therefore we put you to death. We do to you what you did to someone else. Now, did you two guys kill someone? No.
We tried to.
You tried to. The Torah's novelty is we listen to the second pair of testimony. We learned this in last week's Parshat. And we, in the case that they're committed, even though they didn't kill. So there are other novelties in the Torah Ramban brings, and there are a few more, that there's severity of din, even though the one accused really did not yet commit a capital crime. That's what I wanted to explain regarding this mitzvah. Malta, your question, and then your questions.
Prevention for crime, why is the punishment stoning and not a different way of because stoning is the most worst of it.
Beautiful. Malta's question is, of the four ways of capital punishment, skila, sreifa, hereg, and chenek, skila, stoning, is the most severe according to Chachamim's opinion, chapter 6, Mishnah 1, in Masechet Sanhedrin. I didn't think about that question. What I'd like to engage and say is that the basis of a society of the Jewish people is our tradition from our parents, our grandparents, going all the way back to our Rabbi Moshe Rabbeinu. Parents who bothered to bring us into the world, to raise us, to teach us, to not sleep at nights and worry and this and that. That's the most central element of Jewish Torah, Jewish society, and therefore the violation of honoring parents. Right? We have two mitzvot regarding parents. There's the positive mitzvah, ish, kabed et avicha ve'et imecha, the positive one, to honor them. And there's the negative one in Vayikra 19, quote, ish, every man, aviv ve'imo, tiro, shall have fear of his parents. He violated the positive and the negative. It's so central, so important, that God forbid we see how he's going to be a menace to society. He deserves the worst or the most severe death penalty. That's what I think. You had a question, sir? 10 minutes ago.
You sort of invalidated my question, but I'll tell it to you anyway. My question was how does a parent decide that their kid has reached that point? Like, because
after warning and after warning, he continues to steal. He continues to get drunk. He continues to be a glutton. He eats so much meat. time after time. He's 13 years old already. That's what the Ramban says. We see it many times. Again, Rabbi Akiva says it never happened, and it's only written as a deterrent for future matters.
How do you know it's not just a phase?
Well, he's been doing it all the time until now. He's been doing it all the time. Yes, you're not used to European society. These people, he knows what drinking is about, right? A lot of the Gentiles, I think in Europe, drink much more than the Gentiles in America.
I don't know.
Or maybe in Russia at least.
Well, you're from Germany, so you all have a lot of beer. You can drink beer at...
I was never a beer drinker. I'm a special case.
But you could drink beer at 6... Well, now that it's Malki, so...
At age 16?
Yeah, it's 16.
Sure, it's legal at 16.
You have to be 21 in the U.S.
Yeah, I know, right? That's...
It's part of the culture, drinking a lot. Yes, Ranan.
When they bring this, it's like to an example for the other people, for him to don't influence another people to do the same stuff, right? So it's like why they never did, and we see that clearly in the history that there was rebels.
We had rebels, but not to this extent apparently. According to Rabbi Akiva, it never happened. And in addition, what I wanted to explain to you is it's very hard for the court of Israel to issue a death penalty. When you get to learn the Talmud and see the laws of witnesses and investigation and all this and that, it's very difficult. But the fact that it's here, we should know it's not. We're not here to play around.
The modern state of Israel has only ever executed 2 people. The first one was...
So we don't have a Sanhedrin, though, sir.
Well, the first one was by mistake, and the second one was Eichmann. So
It was
Eichmann.
Eichmann who deserves it.
What's my mistake?
During the war in 1948, they had believed that an officer was feeding information to the Egyptians, and they executed
What was his name?
I can't remember his name.
Ken Asher.
Yeah, it just kind of connects me to the previous, in not in the room, but in the Midbar, where it talks about when we were in the, coming to Eretz Israel on the wilderness. It talks about the story of how Kadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem is blessing the grandchildren of Misao. The reason was he respected his parents. That was one of
his positive traits.
Yeah. So when I really think about maybe here, the punishment seems really, really harsh. So maybe the point is do not disrespect your parents. And apart from the stealing, and that is something very bad. But I think the point would be about respecting parents.
That's the basis. That was the answer to the question of Malta. Thank you. Okay.
Meir Tobayansky was his name.
I don't remember that. Thank you. Pasuk Kaf Bet, 2 more verses to the end of this chapter. And we again talk about individuals that have gone overboard, very material, very personal, not overcoming their Yetzer Hara. V'chiya ve'ish, if you'll find in a man, chet mishpat mavet, a sin which is a capital sin, mishpat mavet, the law of death. You see it? Vehumat, and he was caused to death. He was brought to death by who? Obviously, by the Sanhedrin. Vitalita oto aleit, and you're going to hang him on a gallows, on a tree. And we can now ask ourselves, gee, which death penalty obligates someone to be hung? So this isn't so very good. There are 2 opinions in our Mishnah, in our oral Torah. Rashi actually brings an opinion which is not the halachic opinion. Do you see the Rashi, the second one here in verse 22? Rashi says, if you can find it down below, Vitalita oto aleit, Rabotenu amru. Our sages said, he's referring to Rabbi Eliezer's opinion in the Sanhedrin, page 45. Kol haniskalim nitlim, anyone that's brought the penalty of being stoned is to be hung. But that's not the halachic opinion. The halachic opinion is not Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. The halachic opinion is Chachamim's opinion, that only certain sins, after they're killed, will they be hung. And of course, the hanging is starting to teach us something. And we'll get to it in a moment, where the Torah says, let's just read the next pasuk, Lo talin nivlato ala eitz. Lehalin. Malone. What's a malone? You lodge over at a hotel. When the day passes and the evening sets in, do not leave the corpse al ha'etz, on the gallows, on the tree. Why? Ki kavortik berenu bayomahu. On that day, you have to bring him to burial. A Jewish body, even after a terrible sin of being killed and then hung, must get what we call, the body must be placed inside the earth. The body must go back to its original source, to the dust of the earth where God created Adam HaRishon from. We have an order. It has to be done quickly on that day. Don't leave it to opportune. Ki kavortik varenu bayom. On that day you must bury him. Why? Ki kililat Elohim taloi. The curse of God is being hung up. What does that mean? We'll get to it in a moment. Velo titamei ad admatcha. There's a problem here. If he remains unburied, it's considered defiling your land. Your land, my land, our land of the Jewish people, is a holy land, the land of God. Apparently there's something about not bringing to burial, causing the dead to be hung up on top of the land. That's considered a spiritual defilement, a spiritual blemish to the holy land of Israel, the holy land of God. We're going to forward this point in a moment. Asher Hashem Elokecha, this is your land that God your Lord noten lecha nachala. So let's go from point to point. The opposing opinion that Rashi brought, that anyone that is stoned to death must be hung, the rabbi's opinions, like you mentioned in a moment ago, Ezra, and that is someone that, God forbid, the Ramban brings it here, someone that blasphemies God, someone that does idolatry, the two very severe sins of, God forbid, cursing God and or idolatry. Those two require skila, to be what? To be killed by stoning. And those are the two that require what? To be hung. And why are they hung? Because they did such a terrible violation. That's the language of the pasuk. Kililat Elokim taloi. The curse of God is being hung up. In other words, they belittled God, they cursed God, they bowed down to idolatry. We want people to know that. We want people to know that. However, at the same time that they got their death penalty and to be hung, a double punishment for the severe sin of blessing God. I'm saying it in the, what is the language when you say something in the opposite sense?
Irony.
No, not an irony. I forgot the word. Sagi
Sarcasm.
nahor. I forgot the
Sarcasm?
word. I forgot the word. Is
What is it?
a euphemism? No. When I say he blessed God, I mean the opposite. What is that called in English?
I think that's sarcasm.
No, there's another term I'm looking for. I forgot it.
What is it in Hebrew?
It's an Aramaic term, Sagi Nahor, full of light. Rav Yosef, who was blind in the Gemara, he was called Sagi Nahor, is full of light. It's not a euphemism, right? I forgot the words. My English is terrible. You're all right. You should know. No, okay, we'll get it later. Asha will look it up and find it and tell us. He almost has a PhD in English.
Yeah, PhD Google.
Gentlemen, my dear friends, the Torah of Israel says, even if this guy was hung up all day, he was hanging around. Ha ha ha.
It's a euphemism.
It is the word euphemism. Are you proud of me?
Yes.
I know some English. Wow, I still have hope. Renat is laughing. What do we learn here? That we have to bring the body to burial. That in spite of the fact that he sinned terribly against God, we do not belittle the body, and rather, if the body will remain hung and not brought to burial in the evening, it'll be considered tumah, defilement to the land. A Jew that committed a capital sin and received his punishment, that same day, the body must be brought to burial. The body that was a kli, a vehicle, a vessel to contain the neshama, and he stained his neshama by doing a terrible sin, there's still order and Torah order to the body. There's the laws of burial. We have an order, has to be done quickly. that day, and don't leave him hanging around. Otherwise, it'll be a tumah to the divine land. Questions? Yes, Rana.
There is in Torah about it, something about this, what led this kind of death.
In the oral Torah, we learn in the cases of idolatry, blaspheming God, certainly someone who is gone so far away from Judaism. We see that idolatry is the diametric opposite of monotheism. And monotheism, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, the belief of a one God, who's not corporal, who's not body, who's eternal, who's the source of all living. To go up against that is to deny all of the Torah, to deny everything. And therefore it's deserving of the worst punishment, the most severe punishment, skila, and in this case also tzliya, to be hanging him. We see in the oral Torah, we see cases in the Tanakh. Ken. Yes, Asher.
Do you remember the rabbi who instituted not to have more than one wife?
Rabbeinu Gershon is his name in the 1200s, if I'm not mistaken.
Because
Takanat, it's called Takanat Rabbeinu Gershon, the enactment of Rabbeinu Gershon. What?
I wanted to say his name when you asked, but then I thought, no, it can't be.
Rabbeinu Gershon, very good. I think we're ready now for the few minutes left to begin chapter Kaf Bet. Look at me, Moshe. Kaf.
22.
Wow. So quick. Very good. Kol hakavod.
and this was when Second Temple?
No,
Oh.
in the 1200s, 800 years ago.
Middle Ages in Ashkenaz.
No. Because the reason why I'm asking you this was because
You want to take two wives?
I was in conversation with people from Middle East, like Iraq, Iran, Yemenites. We were just talking, and they said like when they first came to Eretz Israel, when Eretz Israel was formed, they came with more than one wife.
Especially
Because it was a
Yemen, especially Yemenites. They didn't
Yeah.
accept this takana. He said it was in Ashkenaz, meeting in Germany, France, and all those countries.
Yeah, now that I understood, but when you said it was instituted, I was like, why wouldn't they listen?
But today, here in the state of Israel,
Yeah.
you can't marry
Yeah,
two
for
wives.
them, who instituted was Ben Gurion. He instituted for them to marry one wife.
That's correct.
Yeah.
If you are Arabic, you can.
The Arabs have two wives, right? Three wives. Harems.
No,
What
they have more than
Four.
Four.
Four is maximum.
Four is nothing.
Kaf Bet. Oh, you only got 2-3 minutes.
Years old.
Maximum for
Lo tir'eh. Now, I want you to look for a word that is repeated several times. Lo tir'eh et shor achicha, o et seyo nidachim, vitalamta mehem, hashev teshivem leachicha. Vim lo karov, I'm reading now verse 2. Vim lo karov achicha elecha, velo yeda'ato, v'asafto el toch beitecha. והיה עמך עד דראש אחיך אותו, ושבותו לו. וכן תעשה לחמורו, do the same thing for his lost donkey. וכן תעשה לשמלותו, or his lost garment. וכן תעשה לכל אבדת אחיך, so to do for every lost object of your brother. אשר תאבד ממנו ומצאתה, that you found. לא תוכל להתעלם, you cannot ignore it. We read 3 verses, a key word is repeated time and time again, and it is achicha.
Brother?
Hey, brother. Brotherhood. The mitzvah of the return of a lost object, of a fellow Jew, is not just a financial mitzvah, a social obligation. It's showing us the impetus of how really we are one. We're one united entity. We are all brothers. And therefore the word achva, brotherhood, in its different forms, is mentioned here a sum total of how many times? Are you counting from my forehead? You're looking inside the Chumash.
5 or something?
5 times, very good. It's counted 5 times. Okay, we call that achva, brotherhood. Achva. From the word?
Achi.
Ach, brother. Brotherhood. So here we have the mitzvah of brotherhood, means care, pick it up, declare, feed it if it has to be fed. Okay? As I think King Solomon says, the basic theme here is remember your brotherhood and forget any hatred that you may have. God in His great wisdom has given us several mitzvot that try to cause us to be stimulated to care for our fellow Jews. No matter how much you know him or don't know him, how much you like him, don't like him, his financial property is your business. No, he can't say, I didn't see it. Why not? Why can't you say, I didn't see it? Because God sees what's going on in our hearts. He knows exactly. This mitzvah was already commanded to us in the book of Shemot, in Parshat Mishpatim. Okay? But we have several novelties and additions that we'll learn tomorrow, same time, same place. Either be here or be a circle or triangle. There you go. Have a great day, gentlemen.